So for the criteria of the images, for the lateral projection of the orbit, the density and contrast permitting optimal visibility of orbits, and I, for localization of foreign bodies, the superimposed orbital roofs, and closed beam restrictions centered to orbital region. For the modified waters method of the orbits, you need the Petrus ridges lying well below the orbital shadows, the symmetric visualization of orbits, indicating no rotation of cranium, close beam restriction centered to the orbital region. Then for the mandible, we move on to the PA axial projection, the mandibular body. The TMJ is just inferior to the mastoid process and symmetric rami. And then we move on to the axiolateral and axiolateral oblique projections of the mandible. And this one is for the mandibular body. And this one is for the ramus, and for those who have no overlap of the ramus by the opposite side of the mandible, and no elongation or foreshortening of the ramus or body. Then for the symphysis, no overlap of the mentum region by the opposite side of the mandible, and no foreshortening of the mentum region. Then we move on to the sinuses, and we have our lateral sinus and evidence of proper collimation. All four sinus groups but the sphenoidal sinus of primary importance, no rotation of the sella turcica, superimposed orbital roofs, superimposed mandibular rami, clearly visual sinus, closed beam restriction of sinus area, clearly visible air fluid levels if present. Then the PA axial projection Codwell method of the frontal and anterior ethmoid sinuses. We need proper collimation, equal distance between the lateral border of the skull and the lateral border of the orbits, indicating no rotation, Petrus ridges symmetric on both sides, and lying in the lower third of the orbits, the frontal sinus lying above the frontal nasal suture, and the other anterior ethmoid air cells lying above the Petrus ridges, frontal and anterior ethmoid air cells visible, and air fluid levels visible if present. And for the waters project method, the evidence of proper collimation, Petrus ridges lying immediately in the inferior floor of the maxillary sinuses, equal distance between the lateral border of the skull and lateral border of the orbits on both sides, orbits and maxillary sinuses symmetric on both sides, the maxillary sinuses shown, and closed beam restriction of the sinus areas, and clearly visible air fluid levels if present. Then for the last one, the SMV, so we have evidence of proper collimation, equal distance from the lateral border of the skull to the mandibular condyles on both sides, indicating the mid-sagittal plane is perpendicular. Anterior frontal bone superimposed by the mental protuberance, indicating that the OML is parallel. Mandibular condyles anterior to the Petrus pyramid, and clearly visible air fluid levels, if any. And then that is all for the criteria of all of the images of the skull trigger. Thank you.